In the quiet suburbs of Illinois, nestled in a town where neighbors waved to each other on their morning walks and families gathered at church on Sundays, Rebecca Hayes believed she had built the life most women dreamed of. For over 20 years, she had been married to Thomas, a man she thought embodied the very definition of stability. Together, they raised their only child, Daniel, in a modest but warm home filled with laughter, traditions, and the comforting rhythm of ordinary life. Rebecca wasn't just a wife. She was the heart of her family. She hosted Thanksgiving dinners that stretched late into the night, her dining table crowded with relatives and friends, who often marveled at the easy way she and Thomas complemented each other. He, the dependable provider who rarely missed a day of work. She, the nurturing figure who kept the household steady, balancing her own career as a school counselor with raising their son. To everyone who looked in from the outside, the Hayes family seemed picture perfect. And to Rebecca, it felt true, or at least it had for many years. She remembered the way Thomas used to reach for her hand in church, how his arm brushed hers as they washed dishes together, how he laughed at Daniel's endless childhood antics. Those moments, she believed, were the proof of their bond. But as the years went on, small cracks began to form, too subtle at first to name. Thomas often worked late, his explanations vague. He carried two phones, one for work, he claimed, and brushed off questions with a casual smile that was almost too rehearsed. On their anniversary 2 years ago, he had completely forgotten the dinner reservation she'd made at their favorite restaurant. When Rebecca tried to express her disappointment, Thomas apologized with flowers the next day, assuring her that he'd simply been distracted by stress at the office. She wanted to believe him. She needed to believe him. And so she tucked her unease into the back of her mind, where it lingered like a shadow. Still, life pressed forward. Daniel grew into a young man, ambitious and kind, the pride of both his parents. When he announced his engagement, Rebecca felt a swell of joy. Planning a wedding for her only child became her focus, filling her days with flower arrangements, guest lists, and endless calls with caterers. In those moments, she allowed herself to forget the doubts gnawing at her, convincing herself that any lingering oddities with Thomas were nothing more than the byproducts of long marriage. After all, what couple didn't have their rough edges? But sometimes in the quiet of night when the house was still, Rebecca would find herself staring at Thomas as he slept. She'd study his features, once so familiar, and feel a pang of something she couldn't quite name. A distance, perhaps, or the chilling sense that part of him belonged to a world she could not reach. And yet, whenever she tried to shake those feelings off, the universe had a way of reminding her that appearances were not always reality. She recalled one particular morning, about 6 months before the wedding. Thomas had left early, claiming he had a work emergency. Hours later, while running errands, Rebecca spotted him across town in a cafe. He wasn't alone. A woman sat across from him, leaning in close, her hand brushing his wrist in a gesture too intimate to be professional. Rebecca froze, her breath caught in her chest. Before she could gather her courage to approach, Thomas glanced up. His eyes widened slightly at the sight of her, but in an instant he masked it with that familiar smile. The same smile he'd always used to reassure her. Later that evening, when she asked about his day, he casually recounted stories of meetings and deadlines, never once mentioning the cafe. And Rebecca, against the instinct screaming inside her, said nothing. That was the pattern of her marriage in those final months leading to the wedding. Rebecca, the devoted wife who held everything together, and Thomas, the man whose secrecy grew more suffocating by the day. She carried her doubts in silence, bearing them beneath the joy of watching her son prepare for the most important day of his life. What Rebecca didn't know then, standing on the threshold of Daniel's future, was that her own life was about to unravel in ways she could never have imagined. The truth, the devastating truth, wouldn't just surface quietly in the shadows of their home. It would explode in front of her, her son, and everyone she loved. And it would happen at the very moment that was supposed to be one of the happiest days of her life, her son's wedding. The weeks leading up to Daniel's wedding were supposed to be filled with nothing but joy. Rebecca threw herself into the preparations with her usual attention to detail, hand-picking table linens, tasting endless variations of cake flavors, and helping her future daughter-in-law Emily pick out the perfect shade of blush roses for the bouquets. On the surface, everything sparkled with excitement, but beneath it all, Rebecca felt a heaviness she couldn't shake. It wasn't the stress of wedding planning, it was Thomas. He seemed distant, distracted in ways that no longer felt like normal stress. Whenever the subject of the wedding came up, he deflected. If Rebecca asked his opinion about seating charts or toasts, he would nod absent-mindedly, his eyes fixed somewhere far away. He offered vague assurances, whatever you think is best, or I trust your judgment, but never engaged the way she expected a proud father of the groom would. At first, she brushed it off. Maybe he didn't care for details. Maybe he wanted to give her the joy of planning. But soon her instincts told her it was more than indifference. It was avoidance. She noticed it in the smallest things. One evening, she overheard him on the phone in the garage, speaking in a low voice. When she entered, he jumped, quickly ending the call. His explanation was curt. Just work stuff, but his tone carried a defensiveness that gnawed at her. Another night, while tidying his desk, she found a second suit receipt tucked away in an envelope. He had already bought a suit for the wedding, yet here was evidence of another, purchased at a store in a neighboring city. Why would he need two, she wondered. When she asked, he brushed it off, saying the first didn't fit right. His casual dismissal seemed rehearsed, and though she smiled and pretended to accept it, Rebecca felt her doubts sharpen. There were other things too. She noticed him carrying a folded photograph in his wallet, something he kept shielded from view. When she asked about it, he changed the subject so abruptly it startled her. Then there were the unfamiliar names she spotted in his phone, contacts that didn't belong to any work colleagues she knew. Rebecca tried to rationalize, telling herself she was overthinking. After all, this was her husband of 2 decades, the man she believed she knew better than anyone. But as the wedding drew closer, her unease grew louder, whispering questions she couldn't silence. On the morning of the rehearsal dinner, she caught a glimpse of him pacing in the backyard, speaking into his phone again. His words were muffled, but one phrase reached her clearly through the screen door. I'll explain everything at the wedding. Her heart skipped. What did he mean? Explain what? Rebecca tried to shake it off as mishearing. She told herself she couldn't afford to spiral, not with the most important weekend of their lives ahead. So she pushed her fears into the corners of her mind, convincing herself that whatever Thomas was hiding couldn't possibly overshadow the happiness of their son's wedding. But deep down, she knew she was standing on the edge of something, a secret waiting to burst open. And the wedding would not be the joyful celebration she imagined. It would be the stage where her world collapsed. The day of the wedding dawned bright and clear, the kind of September morning that carried just enough warmth to feel alive, without the weight of summer heat. Rebecca awoke early, her heart racing with anticipation. She moved through the house with purpose, steaming her dress, preparing a light breakfast, and reminding herself to breathe. Today was Daniel's day, the culmination of years of love and hard work. The church buzzed with energy as guests began to arrive. Rebecca greeted cousins she hadn't seen in years, exchanged hugs with family friends, and felt a flicker of pride as she introduced Emily's parents to her own relatives. Everywhere she turned, she was met with laughter, chatter, and the joyful chaos that came with two families blending together. The ceremony itself was beautiful. Rebecca watched from the front pew as Daniel stood tall and steady, waiting for his bride. When Emily entered, radiant in her gown, Rebecca's eyes filled with tears. She reached for Thomas's hand out of instinct, seeking the comfort of sharing this monumental moment with him. But when she looked over, his face wasn't filled with the same emotion. Instead, his jaw was tense, his eyes flickering nervously toward the back rows of the church. She brushed it off, telling herself he was just overwhelmed. Still, the unease returned, like an echo of all the doubts she had buried. At the reception, the energy was even more electric. Music filled the ballroom. The newlyweds laughed as they danced their first dance, and glasses clinked in toasts. Rebecca moved gracefully from table to table, thanking guests, ensuring everyone felt welcome. For brief moments, she allowed herself to bask in the glow of pride. But as she mingled, she noticed something odd. A cluster of guests sat at the far side of the room, faces unfamiliar to her. That wasn't unusual at a wedding. Friends of the groom's father often came from work or old connections, but the way they watched Thomas unsettled her. Their eyes seemed fixed on him, their whispers urgent whenever he walked by. Then there was the woman. She sat quietly at one of those tables, her gaze never straying far from Thomas. She was elegant, her posture confident, but there was a strange familiarity about her, as though she belonged here in ways Rebecca couldn't quite place. Several times throughout the night, Rebecca caught Thomas's eyes darting in her direction, his expression taut with unease. And though he tried to carry on, laughing during toasts and making polite conversation, his performance cracked whenever the woman's gaze met his. Rebecca's stomach knotted. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. As the music swelled and the celebration reached its height, Rebecca's fears, those quiet whispers she had silenced for years, roared back to life. She didn't know yet what the woman's presence meant, but she sensed it. The truth wasn't just lurking in the shadows anymore. It was sitting at a table in the same room, waiting for its moment to be revealed. And that revelation would strike like lightning, destroying everything Rebecca thought she knew about her marriage. The reception was in full swing when it happened. Guests were laughing, the dance floor was alive with joy, and Rebecca finally allowed herself to exhale. For a fleeting moment, she believed the unease that had haunted her these past weeks might dissolve into nothing more than wedding day nerves. But fate had other plans. It began innocently enough. The band had just finished a lively song when the MC invited everyone to raise their glasses for a toast. Rebecca stood beside Thomas at the head table, smiling, her gaze locked on her son and his bride. But just as she lifted her glass, movement at the back of the room caught her attention. The elegant woman from earlier had risen from her seat. Her steps were purposeful, her expression resolute as she crossed the room. The crowd, sensing something unusual, fell into an uneasy hush. Even the band's instruments seemed to fade, replaced by the sound of heels clicking against the ballroom floor. She stopped directly in front of the head table, her eyes locked not on Rebecca, but on Thomas. "I can't stay quiet any longer," the woman declared, her voice strong and steady. "This man, Thomas Hayes, he isn't just your husband." She turned, her gaze sweeping the room, her words slicing through the air. "He's mine too. We've been married for 15 years. The ballroom froze. Glasses hovered midair, mouths fell open, and whispers rippled like wildfire. Rebecca's hand trembled, her glass slipping from her fingers and shattering against the floor. For a moment the world tilted. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The words didn't make sense, and yet the certainty in the woman's tone, the cold truth in her eyes, left no room for doubt. Rebecca turned to Thomas. His face had drained of color. He opened his mouth, but no words came. His silence was confirmation enough. Gasps erupted from the crowd. Emily's parents looked horrified, while Daniel stood frozen, his hand gripping the back of his bride's chair, as though it were the only thing keeping him upright. The whispers grew louder. 2 wives, another marriage, at his son's wedding? Rebecca's mind spun. 15 years. All that time. Parallel lives. Another woman believing she was the wife. Her chest ached as if crushed beneath the weight of a lifetime of lies. Every late night, every hushed phone call, every unexplained trip now clicked into place. The woman continued, her voice laced with bitterness. "I have the papers, the photographs, the proof. While you were planning this wedding, Rebecca, I was wondering why my husband was so busy, why he avoided me for weeks. Now I see, he was living another life. With you, the crowd erupted into chaos. Guests murmured, some openly staring, others covering their mouths in shock. Cameras flashed, recording every second of the scandal unfolding in real time. Rebecca felt the sting of humiliation burn hotter than the betrayal itself. Not just the deception, but the spectacle. Her private life, her sacred marriage, was now ripped wide open before friends, family, and strangers alike. Her son's wedding day, meant to be a celebration of love and unity, had been hijacked by deceit. Thomas finally found his voice, his words stumbling. "Rebecca, please, let me explain." "Explain?" she snapped, her voice trembling with fury. "Explain how you lived a lie for decades? How you stood beside me, raised our son, while you were bound to another woman? He reached for her hand, but she recoiled, her eyes blazing. The strength she didn't know she possessed surged within her. She would not crumble here, not in front of everyone. The woman glared at Thomas, then turned her back on both of them, leaving the room in the stunned silence as she exited. But the damage was done. The secret was out. Rebecca's world had shattered in the most public way possible, and as she looked into the horrified eyes of her son, she knew the betrayal was no longer hers alone to bear. It had infected her entire family. The room buzzed with chaos long after the woman's departure. Guests huddled in groups, whispering furiously, their eyes darting toward Rebecca and Thomas as though watching a tragedy play out in real time. Rebecca sat frozen in her chair, numb. Her mind replayed the words, "He isn't just your husband, he's mine too." Over and over, like a cruel chorus she couldn't silence. She looked at her son Daniel, who stood pale and unsteady. His wedding day, meant to be the happiest of his life, had been poisoned by his father's secret. Emily clutched his arm, whispering words of comfort, but her eyes flicked nervously between her new husband and her shattered mother-in-law. "Mom," Daniel finally whispered, kneeling beside her. His voice cracked, filled with disbelief. "Is it true? Did Dad?" He couldn't finish the sentence. Rebecca's throat tightened. She wanted to protect him, to shield him from the ugliness. But the truth was undeniable, and she could see in his eyes that he already knew. She simply nodded, tears brimming but refusing to fall. The pain in Daniel's expression cut deeper than any wound Thomas had inflicted on her. In that moment, Rebecca realized the betrayal wasn't hers alone. Their son had been lied to, too, raised in a house built on deception. Thomas tried to salvage what little dignity he could. "Rebecca, please, let's go somewhere private. I can explain everything. This isn't what it looks like." His voice was desperate, but the words sounded hollow, rehearsed. Rebecca rose slowly, her body trembling, but her voice steady. "Not here, Thomas. Not tonight." She turned to the crowd, her chin lifted despite the humiliation burning her from within. "This is Daniel and Emily's day. I won't let your lies ruin it any further." Her words silenced the whispers, if only for a moment. Guests exchanged uneasy glances, unsure whether to stay or slip out quietly. The rest of the reception moved forward like a ghost of what it was meant to be. The band played, but the music felt hollow. The cake was cut, but few ate. Every conversation carried the weight of the scandal, and Rebecca, though shattered, held herself upright, refusing to collapse under the weight of her humiliation. Later that night, when the guests had gone and the newlyweds had retreated to their suite, Rebecca sat alone in the darkened hotel room she and Thomas were meant to share. The silence was heavy, broken only by the pounding of her heart. She replayed the years of marriage in her mind, the anniversaries he missed, the excuses, the unexplained absences. All the moments she had dismissed as quirks of a long marriage now shone like red warning lights she had ignored. The truth had been there all along, but she had chosen trust. She had chosen love, and he had chosen betrayal. Thomas stood in the doorway, his face lined with shame. "Rebecca, please. You have to understand. It's complicated." She looked at him, her expression hard. "Complicated?" Her voice was sharp, cutting through the silence. "You lived a double life. You had a wife and a son, and somewhere else, you had another. That's not complicated, Thomas. That's deception. That's cruelty." He hung his head, unable to meet her gaze. For Rebecca, the pain was unbearable, but beneath it, something else stirred. A quiet strength. She would not let this betrayal define her. She would not crumble. If Thomas thought he could strip her of dignity, he was wrong. Because in that moment, Rebecca vowed to uncover everything. Every lie, every hidden truth. And once she had the full picture, she would decide her next move. For now, the wedding was over. But the reckoning had just begun. The morning after the wedding, Rebecca woke in a haze. The celebration that should have been remembered as one of the happiest nights of her life now lingered in her mind as a grotesque nightmare. The echoes of whispers, the gasps from guests, the crushing weight of humiliation. It all played on a loop in her head. She moved slowly through the house, her body on autopilot, but her mind ablaze with questions. Who was this other woman, really? How long had Thomas been married to her? How had he managed to carry out such an elaborate deception for so many years? Rebecca had always prided herself on her intuition, her ability to read the hidden emotions of others as a counselor. Yet she had missed the most devastating truth of all. That thought alone tore through her chest like a blade, but grief quickly hardened into resolve. She was done ignoring the cracks, done silencing her instincts. If Thomas thought he could live a double life and keep her blind, he was wrong. Rebecca began where she knew he would be most careless, his study. It was a space he often treated as his domain, but she had cleaned it enough over the years to know its rhythm. Now, for the first time, she entered not as a wife tidying her husband's desk, but as a detective stepping into enemy territory. She opened drawers, sifted through folders, and scoured the shelves. At first, it looked like nothing but bills, tax forms, and mundane paperwork. But as she dug deeper, she noticed subtle inconsistencies. Duplicate credit card statements from banks she didn't recognize. Receipts for hotels in towns he had never mentioned visiting. Airline tickets purchased under a different billing address. Her hands trembled as she spread the papers across the desk. This wasn't just an affair. This was a second life. Heart pounding, she pulled open the bottom drawer. Tucked beneath old instruction manuals was a leather binder. Inside were photographs. Thomas smiling in a family portrait she had never seen. Beside him stood the same woman from the wedding, and in front of them, a boy no older than 10. Rebecca's stomach lurched. A child. Another family. She clutched the photo with shaking hands. It was undeniable now. Thomas hadn't simply been unfaithful. He had committed bigamy. He had built an entire parallel existence while still standing beside her, raising Daniel and pretending to live the life of a devoted husband. Every ounce of trust she had ever given him disintegrated in that moment. Still reeling, Rebecca pressed on. She combed through the binder, finding documents that made her blood run cold. Joint tax returns filed under a different address, utility bills with Thomas's name alongside the other woman's, and even insurance forms naming the woman as his spouse. He hadn't just lied. He had committed fraud to keep the deception alive. Rebecca sank into the desk chair, her mind spinning. 15 years. For 15 years, she had shared her husband with another woman, unknowingly. He had attended anniversaries with her while celebrating milestones with someone else. He had stood as a father to Daniel while raising another boy in secret. The magnitude of betrayal felt almost too vast to comprehend. But beneath the shock, a new fire sparked. She would not collapse under this revelation. If Thomas had hoped to silence her with shame, he underestimated her. Rebecca was not just a victim. She was a mother, a wife, and a woman who had sacrificed decades for a man who had spat on her devotion. She began organizing the evidence, placing each photograph, each document into a separate folder. This was bigger than heartbreak. This was criminal. Later that afternoon, Rebecca sat across from her closest friend Claire at a quiet cafe. The two women had known each other since college, sharing everything from motherhood struggles to late-night confessions. Now Rebecca unfolded the photographs and documents across the table. Claire gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Rebecca, oh my God, this isn't just betrayal. This is a crime. He's been living a double marriage. Do you realize what this means?" Rebecca nodded, her jaw tight. "I do. It means my life has been a lie. It means Daniel's father is not the man we thought he was. But more than that, it means I have leverage, evidence, and I won't let him bury me beneath his lies any longer." Claire reached across the table, gripping Rebecca's hand. "You're stronger than this, stronger than him. You can fight back." For the first time since the wedding, Rebecca felt a sliver of clarity. She wasn't powerless. She had the truth on her side. That evening, she confronted Thomas. She laid the binder on the dining table, her voice sharp as glass. "I know everything. The other woman, the second marriage, the child, 15 years of lies. Do you have anything left to say to me?" Thomas, his face went pale. His lips parted, but no words came. He looked like a man cornered, his web of deceit finally collapsing around him. Rebecca didn't shout. She didn't weep. Her voice remained steady, calm, and cutting. You will face the consequences. For me. For Daniel. For every year you thought you could fool us. This is no longer your secret to control. In that moment, she felt the shift. For years, she had lived in the shadow of his lies. Now she was stepping into the light, armed with the truth, ready to dismantle the man who had betrayed her so deeply. And this was only the beginning. The evening after Rebecca discovered the binder, the house carried a suffocating silence. Thomas lingered in the kitchen, pacing like a man waiting for a sentence to be handed down. He knew she had the truth now. He could see it in her eyes. No longer the soft gaze of the wife who had once trusted him, but the steady glare of a woman armed with evidence, a woman unwilling to be silenced. Rebecca entered the room, folder in hand. She placed it on the table between them with deliberate calm. For a moment, neither spoke. The hum of the refrigerator filled the silence, and the air seemed to thicken with tension. Sit down, she said finally, her voice cold, steady. Thomas obeyed, lowering himself into a chair like a guilty child awaiting scolding. He tried to speak, but Rebecca raised her hand sharply. No, I talk. You listen. She opened the binder, sliding the photographs across the table one by one. This is you, with her, and a child. While you were telling me you had late meetings, you were with them. While I was waiting at home, you were building a second family. Thomas rubbed his temples, his face pale. Rebecca, please. I never wanted you to find out this way. I thought I could keep both. Both? Her voice cracked like a whip. You thought you could have 2 wives, 2 homes, 2 children? You thought you could live in the middle, pretending to be honorable, when you were nothing but a liar? He opened his mouth, fumbling for excuses. It wasn't like that. I loved you. I love you still. But I couldn't let her go. She needed me. Rebecca slammed her hand on the table, the sharp sound making him flinch. I needed you. Daniel needed you. And you lied to us every single day of our lives. Her voice softened, but only in tone. The edge remained sharp. Do you even realize what you did to your son? On his wedding day? You let another woman walk into that room, in front of everyone we know, and expose you. You humiliated him. You humiliated me. You burned down our family with your arrogance. Thomas's shoulders sagged. I thought I could control it. Keep it separate. I never meant to hurt you. Rebecca shook her head. You didn't just hurt me. You dismantled everything. You made our marriage a lie, our home a lie, even our memories. She leaned closer, her eyes blazing. You committed bigamy, Thomas. Do you understand? This isn't just betrayal. This is a crime. And I will not be your shield. His eyes widened. You wouldn't go to the authorities? Rebecca's lips curved into a grim smile. I already have. The words struck him like a blow. His mouth opened in shock, but no sound came. For the first time, he looked powerless. Rebecca stood tall, her voice unwavering. For years, I lived in the shadow of your lies. I trusted you, I loved you, and you repaid me with deceit. But I will not be destroyed by you. I will not be buried beneath your secrets. From this moment on, I am no longer your wife. You are no longer my husband. You are nothing to me but a cautionary tale of the man I thought I knew. Thomas reached out, desperation in his eyes. Rebecca, please. Don't do this. Don't throw everything away. She pulled her hand back sharply, her final words heavy with conviction. I'm not the one who threw everything away. You did. And now you'll face the consequences, alone. With that, Rebecca turned and walked out of the kitchen. She left him sitting in the silence he had created, surrounded by the wreckage of his lies. For the first time in their marriage, Thomas was the one left powerless, while Rebecca carried herself with the strength of a woman reborn. The weeks that followed were filled with upheaval. News of Thomas's double life spread quickly through their community. Friends who had once admired the Hayes family now whispered in hushed tones, recounting the scandal that had unfolded at Daniel's wedding. Some offered Rebecca quiet sympathy, others marveled at her resilience. But none looked at Thomas the same way again. The legal system moved swiftly, with the evidence Rebecca provided, the photographs, the documents, the fraudulent filings. The authorities opened an investigation. Charges of bigamy and fraud hung over Thomas like a dark cloud, and the second marriage he had so carefully hidden unraveled in the harsh light of truth. Rebecca, meanwhile, focused on reclaiming her life. She filed for divorce with an attorney who guided her through each step. For the first time in decades, she spoke of her future in terms of herself, not as part of a couple. It was terrifying, yes, but also liberating. Daniel stood by her side, his loyalty unwavering. Though devastated by his father's betrayal, he found new strength in his mother's resolve. "You taught me how to love, Mom," he told her one evening as they shared coffee at her kitchen table. "Not him. You." And I'll never forget that his words carried her through the darkest days. Rebecca also leaned on her close friends, women who reminded her that life didn't end with betrayal. She began volunteering at a local shelter, channeling her pain into helping others rebuild their own lives. Slowly, she rediscovered the parts of herself she had lost in the shadows of Thomas's lies, her creativity, her independence, her laughter. One morning, months after the wedding, Rebecca stood in her new apartment. Sunlight streamed through wide windows, illuminating freshly painted walls and soft hues she had chosen herself. It wasn't the grand home she had once shared with Thomas, but it was hers, untouched by deception, filled only with the promise of new beginnings. She brewed coffee, opened her journal, and began to write. Not about pain or betrayal, but about strength, freedom, and resilience. She realized she wasn't simply surviving, she was thriving. Looking back, Rebecca understood that Thomas had stolen years from her, but he had also given her something unexpected. In betraying her so completely, he had forced her to discover a strength she might never have known otherwise. She was no longer the trusting wife who ignored the red flags. She was a woman who had faced the ugliest truths and come out stronger. As she sipped her coffee and gazed out at the city below, she whispered softly to herself, almost like a vow, "I am free." And in that moment, Rebecca Hayes stepped fully into her new life, unbroken, undefeated, and no longer bound by the lies of a man who thought he could control her story. The betrayal had scarred her, yes, but it had also set her free. Her life was no longer defined by Thomas's deceit. It was defined by her own strength, her own resilience, and her unwavering determination to reclaim her future. The wedding that had once been tainted by betrayal would no longer be remembered as the end of her world, but as the beginning of a new one, a life lived on her terms.
And that wraps up today's story. Now we want to hear from you. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments, and let's see how far these stories reach. If this story moved you or gave you chills, give it a like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. One last thing, rate the story from 1 to 10 in the comments. Your feedback helps us bring you even better ones next time. Thanks for watching. We appreciate you being part of this storytelling journey.